and welcome to the world of Hiawatha County, where legends and lore come to life around the shores of the mystical Lake Manitou. I'm author Jason Lee Willis, creator of the Dreamcatcher Chronicles and the Alchemist Chronicles. One of my goals in world building was to find a unique Minnesota mythology for my setting. And to do that, I looked for inspiration from the four cultures that help shape Minnesota: Judeo-Christian, Norse, Dakota, and Ojibwe. As with ravens and horned serpents, I try to incorporate lore that crosses through all four of these cultures. And today, we're going to be looking at the legends of the Little People. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, my entrance to the legend came from the Smurfs. Hardly the stuff of nightmares. There was also the Littles around this time period, and on a slightly more terrifying level, Steven Spielberg brought us Gremlins. While the 80s made some pretty cheesy movies about these old legends, like Leprechaun, the mythology behind Little People legends is actually quite rich. J.R.R. Tolkien, a master of mythology, found several ways to incorporate some of these legends, beyond his own creation of hobbits. A goblin, for example, is a shape-shifting demon responsible for thievery and mischief. The orc is an underground demon from the Tyrol Alps, think of the Misty Mountains, who are taller, horse-hoofed, horse-haired monsters that dwell in caves. In classic alchemy, the four elements were represented by the Undine, the Sylph, the Salamander, and the Gnome. Coined by Paracelsus, whose quest for understanding and discovering the Philosopher's Stone was based on the secrets of the word vitriol, which we know as a blue-green-copper residue. For alchemists, it stood for the Latin phrase that translated as visit the interior of the earth, and by rectification, thou shalt find the hidden stone. Thus, gnomes became symbolic for the earth and digging for the stone. In choosing the Latin word, gnome, Paracelsus connected to the legends of the earth dwellers. There are dozens and dozens of other world myths involving little people. So with this video, I'll try to stick to my four Minnesota cultures. Biblically, the cupboards are empty. Aside from Zacchaeus, there are no little people. But there are demons. So let's take a look at some anecdotes involving them. Depending on which gospel you're looking at, you can find Gadarene or Gerasene, demon-possessed man, the demoniac, whom Jesus confronts beyond the shores of Lake Galilee. When he challenged the demons, the possessed man proclaimed his fear of the abyss. So, what's the abyss? Since this is happening right beside Lake Galilee, it could simply mean deep water. More likely, abyss is a reference to the underworld, and even more specifically, a place within the underworld where the fallen angels are kept imprisoned. That abyss. Another thing we learn in this scene is that the demoniac claims to be legion or many. In other words, it's not just one demon, but a bunch of demons that are possessing this man. This brings up another incident from Luke 11:26. This is where Jesus explains that when casting out a single demon, that demon will go out, seek help, and will come back with several other demons to try again. So sometimes it takes a legion of demons for them to take full control. In the Gerasene case, the demon wanted to be cast back into flesh. In this case, a herd of pigs. Ultimately, the demon's plan backfires when the possessed pigs rush over a cliff and into the water to their death. But it brings up an interesting point. The demons desired flesh. In Hebrew lore, there is a Genesis-era story about how when the abominable giants of Genesis 6 perished, their spirits created demons upon death. Since these demons were not part of God's plan, their spirits were trapped on earth, finding no place in heaven or in hell. Since they were once flesh, they now spend eternity trying to cloak themselves once again in living flesh. When one demon couldn't do it by himself, they resort to bullying tactics, ganging up on their victims. Next, let's take a look at Norse stories of little people. Obviously, Tolkien and every other fantasy writer has already made the world quite familiar with dwarves. So, I dug a little deeper into the legend to focus on a creature known as the Fossegrim, or more simply, the Grimm. I immediately liked the idea of their connection to water, but I really perked up when I learned that they had a connection to music. In a Charlie Daniels way, the Grimm could teach you how to play music, but first, the Grimm had to be fed. And if you weren't careful, this deal with the devil could easily backfire, resulting in your death. In the Ojibwe Legends, the Dakota told of the, excuse me for this one, but the Canotila, more simply, the tree dwellers. Having grown up on the South Dakota prairies, I know the rarity of forests. So my assumption is that these legends came from the big woods of Minnesota, where the Dakota lived until the arrival of the Ojibwe in approximately the 1700s. A cool characteristic of the Canotila is that they are dream messengers, which doesn't sound so bad. However, the explorers, Lewis and Clark, included tales of the Canotila when they discovered Spirit Mound along the Missouri River in southeastern South Dakota. Their description mentioned that these creatures were 18 inches high, had large heads, and according to the lore told to them, these little people were armed with sharp arrows that were so effective at killing that once 350 Dakota warriors were almost wiped out while camping at the grassy hill. The tales from the Anishinaabe people are as varied as the tribes that range from Nova Scotia to North Dakota. Henry Schoolcraft wrote about Eastern legends of little people, which use the word Pukwudgie. Now, Pukwudgie translates as little wild man of the woods that vanishes. Schoolcraft's account describes them as looking like a porcupine from the back. These creatures are half troll, half human, and the Pukwudgies would lure people to their deaths using magic, and they had little poisonous arrows. When a Pukwudgie was near, they gave off a sweet, flowery smell. Many of the stories focus on how they would use tricks to steal children. In a more sinister twist, those whom they kill became the Tai Pe Wanka and became thralls to their masters. When I shared this term Pukwudgie with my father, who alpha reads my drafts, he told me that Pukwudgies sounded silly and I should find a different term. Right after his comment, I learned that J.K. Rowling of Harry Potter lore expanded her world to include Native American houses in her wizarding world that included, of course, Pukwudgies. So I went looking for another term. However, I found the term Pukwudgie to have an interesting connection to another troublesome wood nymph. In Shakespeare's play, A Midsummer Night's Dream, he has a character named Robin Goodfellow, who is also known as Puck. While it's certainly not Greek in origin, this name has some peculiar connections to Western European legends. A fun coincidence from across the Atlantic. The Ojibwe around Lake Superior tell of a Memegwesi, which translates as short, hairy man. But they also tell of a Memegwan, a creature that vanishes from view around adults. But in this story is tender to kids. And get this, is a protector of copper mines. Since my county and lake are quite fictional, I also had a fictional Ojibwe clan, the Wijigan clan, who settled along the shores of Lake Manitou. I invented a name, the Takpai, but I incorporated many of the characteristics we've looked at. My monsters have a water connection, the fear of the abyss. Like the Tai Pe Wanka, they are thralls, in my case, servants of the Wintermaker. However, as in the case of Adam Thunderface from the first book, they can create thralls through possession. Like most horror stories, children are their preferred victims, who are often lured to their deaths. In going to the old Hebrew lore, my, quote, dead giants are now only oily shadows seeking flesh. And when they grow stronger, they can take form, appearing at first as porcupine men in the dark places of the forest. And copper? Oh yes, they lurk around the copper vitriol of Blue Knife River and Old Copper Road. Hardly Smurfs, huh? So, if you'd like to read more about my Takpai, be sure to check out my Dreamcatcher Chronicles series, available for order on my website, jasonleewillis.wixsite.com/novels. Until next time,